Lucius Seneca watched the most successful men in Rome and felt something close to pity for them. Not because they were failing per se, but instead because they were succeeding in the wrong things. Every day they were progressing faster and faster to places which they never actually examined, accumulating absolutely everything that the culture told them that they needed and told them to want, and eventually arriving repeatedly at the same specific emptiness of a person who has been magnificently productive and has nothing to show for it that actually matters in their life. He wrote about that in 49 AD, and 2,000 years later, the calendar looks completely different, yet the emptiness stayed the exact same. Now, his book on the shortness of life is not a book about life being genuinely short and the fact that you die eventually, but instead is a book about the time you have and the way you use it. Specifically about the gap between the time you are given and the time you actually use in your day-to-day living. His argument is very precise and, in that same sense, ends up being quite uncomfortable for most people reading it. Life itself is not short. Instead, we make it feel short. The time available to a human being, if used with any sort of seriousness whatsoever, is more than sufficient for everything and anything that actually matters within one's life. The problem per se is not the quantity of time we are given, but instead what we do with that quantity of time. And what most people do with their time is give it away to other people's urgencies or to obligations that were never actually theirs, or to the performance of productivity instead of genuine productivity. It's, in a sense, to the elaborate, socially rewarded performance of someone who has no time, or becoming someone who acts as if they have no time because they hand it all away. Seneca wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. He was writing to a man named Polinius, and he could have also just been writing to you because of how relatable that line genuinely is if you stop and think about it for just 1 minute. However, the specific failure that Seneca was pointing at is that the busy person, which is the genuinely and sincerely and not performing it busy person, has made a decision about what their time is for. They have decided and said outright, and not always consciously, but they have decided that their time is simply for output. Their time is for production and production alone, and for the completion of tasks that generate visible results to everyone else around them. And in a sense, it may feel virtuous to them because the culture does reward it. Societally, they are rewarded for that productivity. The person who is always busy, who is always optimizing or always moving towards the next thing or big goal, that person is celebrated and rewarded for their work, and that person is taken seriously. That person is considered to be going somewhere. Now, Seneca's question, which is the one that punctures absolutely everything I just talked about, the one that debunks that entire argument, is where? Where are they going? Where exactly are they taking themselves? And where exactly is the next goal leading them to be? And when you arrive to that next goal, will you have anything or anyone, or will you have become anything worth actually being in your life? Because the accumulation of completed tasks is nowhere near the same thing as genuinely living a life. The optimized morning routine is not for wisdom, and neither is the full calendar genuinely considered any sort of depth or character. The person who has been magnificently producing for the past 40 years has never actually once sat with a difficult situation or a difficult question about how they are genuinely living. That person may have been considered busy, but they have not been alive in the sense of Seneca's worth for that word. The alternative he offers, however, is not laziness. It's not telling you to stop producing or stop working in any sense. That is, in my opinion, the biggest misread that people make about the book on the shortness of life. That is what makes most people dismiss him too quickly. Don't get me wrong, Seneca worked hard. He worked harder than most people ever have. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome at the time, and he wrote and he engaged with the world and produced for the world at a significant scale. Without him, we wouldn't be anywhere close to what we actually are right now. However, he was not arguing for idleness, but instead arguing for wisdom as the primary activity instead of business. Not as some sort of thing that you eventually arrive at, but instead as the thing that everything else should be organized around by using their time proficiently. In Seneca's framework, the wise person is the only person who is not running out of time and is using it sufficiently. Because the wise person is genuinely using their time compared to the person who's so hyper-fixated on productivity, who is, I guess in a sense, sacrificing their time for that business to be produced. Every single hour spent in genuine examination of the self, or of how to live, or of what matters in your life, or what you should actually give your time to and what you should release from your time, that hour is owned completely. It cannot be taken back ever. Every single second that ticks by cannot be taken back. But I think these kind of moments that you spend your life presently in cannot also be considered wasted, because you are doing something genuine that affects the rest of your time. It cannot be lost to the entropy that the world swallows every single hour in unreflective busyness. Therefore, Seneca wrote, "Of all people, only those who are at leisure make time for philosophy. Only those truly live." And you yourself already should know what this costs for you to sit with it. You should know the burden that comes upon your life when you sit with the genuine question of, am I wasting my time or am I living through wisdom? Because you have the list of your life, the things that you will maybe get to when you have more time, or the books that you say you will read when the project is done, or when the business starts kicking off. The questions you will eventually ask yourself when everything else settles in place of it. However, I'm here to tell you that things themselves will never settle. The project will then always be replaced by another project, and the busyness self replenishes itself, because busyness is not a circumstance. It is a choice that gets made every single morning that you live through. Seneca's alternative wisdom is not complicated. It is just uncomfortable to sit with and actually try and live through for the first week or month or year or even decade. However, wisdom is not what you get to eventually. Don't decide that. Don't tell yourself that you'll eventually arrive at wisdom once you have the time. Instead, you should decide that wisdom is what you are built for, what you are living through life for, because then you will become wise. And I'm not saying it's a magical transformation that maybe once you become wise, everything will come to you and you'll comprehend life. But I'm just saying that once you start organizing your hours accordingly, after telling yourself that you are working towards being a wise person, and it doesn't have to be perfectly, it doesn't have to be all at once, but simply with enough seriousness to tell yourself that once you look back at how you spent your time, you'll find something there that was worth having spent it on. Once you tell yourself you may become wise, and once you start putting the time in and organizing the time around becoming wise, it is inevitable that you become wise in any slither of a sense. That is just a fact in life. The business will always need more of you. However, the question is whether or not you will always give the business what it demands of you.